On the morning of October 22nd, 2026, the official position of the Green Mountain County Engineering Department was that the road was lost. 3 days of torrential autumn rain had turned the soil on the upper slopes of Black Bear Mountain to a soupy clay, and a section of the hillside had finally let go. It had slid down in a single cohesive mass, carrying with it a local landmark known to generations as the Glacier Stone. This was not a boulder. It was a geological pronouncement. A house-sized lump of granite, scoured smooth on one side by the ancient ice that had left it stranded. It now sat squarely in the middle of County Road 9, severing the town of North Haven from the valley below. 3 excavators had been brought to the site. The first, a respectable 30-ton machine, had managed only to spin its tracks, polishing a groove in the wet asphalt. The second, a 50-ton behemoth hauled in from a quarry operation 2 counties over, had succeeded in snapping a 2-inch hardened steel tow hook. The third attempt involved both machines working in tandem, with a system of pulleys and anchors bolted to the bedrock on the far side of the road. That effort had ended when a hydraulic line on the larger machine burst, spraying hot fluid in a shimmering, defeated plume. Grant, the county engineer, stood with his hands on his hips, his bright yellow hard hat a useless splash of optimism in the grey, drizzly morning. He was 34 years old, held a master's degree in civil engineering from a prestigious university, and believed, with the unshakable faith of the young and credentialed, that any physical problem could be solved with sufficient application of horsepower and data. The Glacier Stone was proving him wrong. His data told him the stone weighed approximately 93 tons. His horsepower, totaling over 700 between the 2 diesel engines, had proven entirely insufficient. The small crowd of locals that had gathered at the police barricade watched in silence. They were loggers, farmers, and mechanics. They understood mass and inertia in a way that was less calculated and more felt. They saw the problem not as a number on a spreadsheet, but as a stubborn fact of the earth. Now, they were watching the embodiment of modern efficiency, Grant and his team, stare at that fact with blank incomprehension. A quiet verdict was settling over the crowd. The machines had lost. It was then that a low, rhythmic chuffing sound began to echo from up the old logging trace that joined the county road a quarter-mile back. It was a sound that didn't belong in the 21st century. It was low, deep, and wet, like the breathing of some great iron beast. Heads turned. Grant squinted, annoyed by the interruption. A few minutes later, the source of the sound emerged from the trees. It was a 1923 Case steam traction engine. Enormous, black, and impossibly archaic, it rolled forward on cleated steel wheels that were taller than a man. A thin plume of wood smoke and steam rose from its deck into the damp air. At its controls, perched on a simple steel seat, was Hollis, an 82-year-old farmer whose family had worked this same patch of Vermont upland since before it was a state. He brought the machine to a halt with a final, sighing hiss of steam, its immense flywheel spinning down to a stop. A few people in the crowd chuckled, a low murmur of pity and amusement. It was Hollis and his ridiculous toy, a parade piece, a relic. Grant stared, his mouth slightly agape, as if he were seeing a dinosaur walk out of the woods. Hollis climbed down slowly, his movements deliberate. He walked over to the engineer, ignoring the useless yellow excavators, his eyes fixed on the stone. He was not a large man, but he stood with a stillness that suggested deep roots. He looked at the granite, then at the churned-up mud, and then at Grant. "You're trying to pull it too fast," he said. His voice was quiet, gravelly from decades of outdoor air. Grant, still processing the sheer absurdity of the steam engine's appearance, could only stammer. That's a museum piece. Sir, we have the best equipment available. The problem is tonnage, not speed." Hollis nodded slowly, as if Grant had said something interesting but not entirely relevant. "I can move it," he stated, not as a boast, but as a simple observation. The offer hung in the air, a strange and impossible proposition. The laughter from the crowd had died, replaced by a tense, curious silence. The engineer, the man of data and modern machinery, looked at the old farmer and his century-old engine, and for the first time in his professional life, he had absolutely no idea what to do. To understand what happened next, to understand the groan of steel and the shifting of stone that followed, you have to go back 14 years. You have to understand the man, the machine, and the long, slow work that everyone else had dismissed as madness. The story really begins in the summer of 2012, at a farm auction just outside of St. Johnsbury. It was a liquidation. The old Miller farm was being sold off, the land to a developer, and the equipment to whoever would haul it away. Hollis was there, accompanied by his son, Dale, and his 10-year-old grandson, Wyatt. Dale, a practical man who ran a successful auto repair shop in town, was there to scout for a used hydraulic lift. Hollis was there for something else entirely. He stood at the back of the crowd, patient and silent, as the auctioneer worked his way through tractors, balers, and plows. Then they came to the last lot, pushed off to the side behind the crumbling barn, half swallowed by weeds and raspberry brambles. It was the Case steam engine. It was a corpse of a machine. Its steel wheels were sunk into the mud, its boiler jacket was a patchwork of rust, and its brass fittings were green with corrosion. A family of raccoons had made a home in its firebox. The auctioneer didn't even try to sell it with his usual vigor. "All right, folks, lot 214, the big one. A 1923 Case 110 horsepower steam traction engine. As is, where is. Good for scrap, I suppose, or a heck of a mailbox post. What am I bid for this piece of history? Let's start it at scrap value. $500? Silence. Even the scrap dealers shook their heads. It would cost more than that to cut it up and haul it away. 500, Hollis said, his voice clear in the quiet. Dale turned to his father, his face a mask of disbelief. "Dad, what are you doing? That's a pile of junk. You'll never get it off this property." Hollis ignored him. The auctioneer, surprised, pointed a finger. "I got 500 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 6? Another farmer, old enough to remember steam engines, chuckled. "What's the matter, Hollis? Your garden tractor break down?" A few people laughed. Hollis's expression didn't change. A scrap dealer, perhaps thinking he'd missed something, shouted, "550! 1,000, Hollis said immediately, his voice flat. A hush fell over the small crowd. The bidding was now well past scrap value. This wasn't a joke. Dale put a hand on his father's arm. "Dad, stop. This is crazy. You're throwing money away." 2,000, Hollis said, his eyes still fixed on the rusted machine. Young Wyatt looked back and forth between his father's frantic expression and his grandfather's serene calm, utterly confused. The scrap dealer threw his hands up and backed away. The auctioneer, smelling a real bid, changed his tone. $2,000, a piece of American history, folks, an icon of agricultural power. He looked around. There were no other takers. Sold to Hollis for $2,000. As the crowd dispersed, Dale confronted his father, his voice a low, angry whisper. $2,000. For that, plus the cost of a heavy haul rig to move it. What on earth are you thinking? It will cost you 10 grand before you even get it home. And for what? A lawn ornament? Hollis finally turned to look at his son. He put a hand on young Wyatt's shoulder. "It's not junk," he said quietly. "It just needs time. It's sleeping." Wyatt looked at the massive rusted engine. It didn't look like it was sleeping. It looked dead. He felt a hot flush of embarrassment for his grandfather, a feeling he would carry for many years to come. That day, Hollis had not just bought a machine. He had bought himself a decade and a half of solitary work, of ridicule, and of patient, methodical purpose. Let me tell you about the 1923 Case 110 horsepower steam traction engine, because it's where the story really begins. It was not a tractor in the modern sense. A modern tractor is a complex machine of electronics, hydraulics, and high-speed diesel power. The Case was a locomotive without rails. It was a force of nature, tamed and put to work. Its power didn't come from the explosion of refined fuel, but from the quiet, immense expansion of water into steam. It was, at its core, a simple machine. A firebox to burn wood, a boiler to hold water and steam under pressure, and two massive pistons, connected by rods to a crankshaft, which turned the enormous rear wheels. There were no complex transmissions, no delicate electronics. There was just fire, water, steel, and steam. Its power was not measured in the frantic spinning of an engine, but in the slow, inexorable turning of its wheels. A modern diesel engine achieves its power at thousands of revolutions per minute. The Case delivered its maximum torque at around 200. This was the fundamental difference, the philosophical divide that the engineer Grant could not grasp. His machines were designed for speed and versatility. They used gearing and hydraulics to multiply the force from their fast-spinning engines. But in doing so, they created a brittle chain of components. When faced with an immovable object, their wheels would spin, their gears would strain, and their hydraulic lines would burst. They were sprinters. The Case steam engine was a weightlifter. It was designed to apply a massive, unbroken stream of torque directly to the ground. Its giant, cleated wheels were not meant to spin. They were meant to grip the earth and turn it, pulling the world behind them if necessary. Its power was patient. It didn't jerk or lunge. It leaned into the load, and it kept leaning, the pressure from the boiler a constant, relentless force on the pistons. To the modern world, it was hopelessly obsolete. It was inefficient, consuming vast quantities of wood and water. It was slow, with a top speed of maybe 4 miles an hour. It was dangerous. A boiler explosion could level a building. It took half a day to build up a head of steam just to get it started. The county zoning board considered it a liability, a fire hazard, a piece of industrial blight. To Dale, it was a monument to his father's stubbornness. To Wyatt, for most of his youth, it was Grandpa's weird old tractor, a source of mild embarrassment when his friends came over. But Hollis saw something else. He had grown up in the shadow of these machines. He had heard the stories from his own grandfather about threshing season, when the big engines would pull the threshing machines from farm to farm, their whistles echoing through the valleys. He knew that they had cleared the very land that his family still farmed. He saw not a relic, but a repository of a different kind of knowledge, a different understanding of power. He saw a biography written in iron and steel, and he decided he would not let that story end in a scrapyard. The 14 years that followed the auction were a long, slow education in the nature of patience. Moving the engine from the Miller farm was an ordeal in itself, just as Dale had predicted. It required a specialized heavy-haul truck with a winch that groaned at its limit. The journey to Hollis's farm was a parade of one, snarling traffic for miles. The neighbors shook their heads, confirming their belief that old Hollis had finally lost his senses. He had it placed on a thick concrete slab he had poured behind his barn. And there the real work began. For the first year, Hollis and the reluctant Wyatt did nothing but take it apart. It was a process of industrial archaeology. Every nut, some as big as a fist, was heated with a torch and laboriously turned with a 6-foot wrench. Every part was tagged and sketched in a notebook. Wyatt, at 10 and 11, hated it. His job was to scrub decades of hardened grease and rust from each piece with a wire brush and kerosene. It was dirty, boring work. His friends were playing video games. He was cleaning some ancient, meaningless gear. "Why are we doing this, Grandpa?" he would ask, his hands raw. Because you have to know a thing from the inside out before you can ask it to work for you, Hollis would reply, never looking up from the part he was examining. You have to know where it's strong and where it's been hurt. They found hurts, a hairline crack in one of the main bearing caps, pitting inside the boiler, a slight warp in one of the piston rods. To a modern mechanic like Dale, these were signs of a fatal illness. "Dad, you can't get parts for this stuff. Just let it go." But Hollis wasn't looking for parts. He was looking to understand the machine's history of work and stress. He spent an entire winter in his workshop teaching himself how to weld cast iron, a notoriously difficult skill. He bought an old industrial lathe and spent months learning to turn new bushings from raw bronze stock. He didn't just repair the machine, he re-inhabited the skills of the man who had first built it. The boiler was the heart of the engine, and Hollis treated it with a reverence bordering on the spiritual. He knew that a weak boiler was a bomb. He hired a certified inspector, a man who usually worked on commercial power plants, to come and assess it with ultrasonic equipment. The inspector, a man much like Grant, was dismissive at first. But as he watched Hollis meticulously clean and prepare every surface, his respect grew. "You know," the inspector said, tapping the thick steel plate of the boiler shell, "this was made from better steel than we can get most places today. They rolled it slow, with fewer impurities. It's got character." Hollis simply nodded. He already knew. He spent 2 years replacing the boiler's flues, hundreds of steel tubes that transferred the fire's heat to the water. It was painstaking, repetitive work, each tube having to be cut to length, seated, and then expanded into place with a special tool. Wyatt, now a teenager, found himself drawn into the work, no longer just a begrudging helper, but a genuine apprentice. He learned the satisfying ring of a properly seated flue, the precise amount of pressure to apply with the expander. He began to see the engine not as a pile of parts, but as a single, interconnected system. The reassembly took another 3 years. It was a slow, deliberate ballet of chain hoists and pry bars. Parts weighing hundreds of pounds had to be aligned with the watchmaker's precision. Wyatt, now taller and stronger, provided the muscle. Hollis provided the knowledge, the feel, the sixth sense for when the metal was aligned just right. Dale would watch them from a distance, shaking his head. His own world of computerized diagnostics and snap-on parts was clean, fast, and profitable. His father's world was low, dirty, and consumed money without any logical return. He loved his father, but he could not understand him. Finally, after nearly a decade of work, the day came to fire it for the first time. Hollis filled the boiler with water he had treated himself, laid a careful fire of seasoned hardwood in the firebox, and lit it. For hours they waited. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the slow ticking of the steel as it expanded. Wyatt, now 20, felt a tension he couldn't explain. He had invested a third of his life in this machine. He had come to understand its logic, to respect its immense, dormant strength. The pressure gauge, a beautiful brass circle on the backhead, began to move. First 10 pounds, then 50, then 100. Hollis watched it, his hand resting gently on the boiler shell, feeling its vibrations, listening to its hum. At 150 pounds per square inch, he nodded to Wyatt. "Open the cylinder cocks," he said. Wyatt pulled the lever, and with a loud hiss, condensed water sprayed from the sides of the massive steam chests. Hollis took a breath. He wrapped his hand around the throttle, a long steel bar known as the Johnson bar. He eased it forward. There was a great sigh as steam filled the cylinders. He pulled it a little more. The engine gave a single, mighty chuff. The crankshaft turned a few degrees. The entire machine seemed to wake from its long slumber. He gave it more steam, and with a rhythmic, earth-shaking chuff, 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 the flywheel began to turn. Wyatt let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked at his grandfather. The old man wasn't smiling. He was listening, his head cocked, his expression one of intense concentration, like a doctor listening to a patient's first breath. The engine was alive. For the next 4 years, Hollis used the engine. He didn't take it to parades or shows. He put it to work. He used it to pull the massive stumps from a field he was clearing. A modern tractor would have struggled, its wheels digging holes. The case would back up to the stump, Hollis would wrap a chain around it, and then he would simply give it steam. The wheels would bite, the chain would tighten to the pitch of a guitar string, and the stump would be lifted from the earth with the sound of tearing roots, the ground surrendering to the engine's patient, irresistible pull. He was not just working the land, he was teaching his grandson and reminding himself of the machine's true nature. This was the history that rolled out of the woods on that damp October morning. It was not a museum piece, it was a fully understood, fully restored, and fully respected instrument of power. The confrontation, when it came, was not in the field, but in the town hall. 2 days after the landslide, with the road still blocked and his excavator sitting idle, Grant called a public meeting. He stood before the townspeople with a PowerPoint presentation showing charts of soil saturation levels, grade percentages, and force vector diagrams. The simple fact, he concluded, clicking to a slide with a large red X over a picture of the boulder, is that the frictional force holding the stone in place, combined with its immense mass, exceeds the tractive effort that can be safely applied by any mobile equipment we can get up that road. Our geotechnical engineer concurs. The options are to use blasting, which carries a significant risk to the stability of the entire hillside, or to begin the multi-year process of surveying and building a new road. The room filled with frustrated groans. A new road meant years of disruption and a huge tax burden. Blasting was a terrifying prospect. Hollis was at the back of the room, as he always was. He had listened patiently to Grant's technical explanation. He didn't disagree with the numbers. He disagreed with the conclusion. The numbers only told you what a certain kind of machine could do. They didn't account for all machines. After the meeting, as Grant was packing up his laptop, Hollis approached him. Dale and Wyatt were with him. Dale looked nervous, as if he were about to apologize for his father's impending foolishness. Wyatt looked on with a quiet, confident resolve that he had not possessed 14 years earlier. "Mr. Grant," Hollis began. Grant turned, a weary and professional smile fixed on his face. "Yes? Can I help you?" He clearly didn't remember the old man from the roadside. "My name is Hollis. I was there the other day. I have a steam traction engine. I believe it can move your stone." Grant's smile faltered. He recognized him now, the crazy old man with the antique. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, I really do. It's a beautiful machine, a real piece of history. But as I just explained, we are dealing with forces here that are..." He searched for a diplomatic word. "Significant. My 50-ton excavator couldn't move it. A machine from 1923, with all due respect, is not going to succeed where modern hydraulics have failed." "Your excavator doesn't pull right," Hollis said simply. "It pulls fast. It spins. You don't need horsepower. You need torque. Steady torque." Grant's professional patience was wearing thin. He was used to dealing with contractors and politicians, not farmers who thought they knew better than his physics simulations. "Look, Mr. Hollis, I can't sanction the use of uncertified, private equipment on a county worksite. The liability is astronomical. If something were to go wrong, if your boiler failed..." "It won't fail," Hollis said. "It was inspected and certified. And I'm not asking for a contract. I'm a resident of this county. That's my road too. My neighbors need it open. I'm going to move the stone tomorrow morning. You can either help me or you can watch." He turned and walked away, leaving Grant standing beside his projector, his mouth hanging open. The system's emissary had just been presented with a variable his spreadsheets had no way of calculating. An old man who refused to acknowledge that he was obsolete. Dale hurried after his father, pleading in a low voice, while Wyatt gave Grant a small, unreadable smile before following. And so, we return to the morning of October 22nd. Hollis's engine sat ticking and hissing, a living thing of iron in the grey light. The crowd was larger now, drawn by the rumor of the coming spectacle. Some came to see a miracle, others to see a fool make a fool of himself. Grant had made a decision. He couldn't officially sanction it, but he couldn't stop it without looking like a bully, so he would let the old man try. When he failed, it would be a clear public demonstration that the county had done everything possible before resorting to more drastic measures. He ordered his men to stand back and clear the area. It was, he told them, a safety precaution. Hollis and Wyatt worked with the silent, efficient communication of a master and a long-serving apprentice. They were not simply going to hook a chain to the boulder. That was the mistake the excavator operators had made. That was the brute force approach. Hollis was going to use knowledge. First, Wyatt used a shovel to clear mud from beneath the front edge of the stone, creating a slight incline. Then, they laid down 2 thick oak planks, creating a small ramp for the stone to begin its journey on. This would drastically reduce the initial breakaway friction. Next came the chain. It was not a modern alloy chain with a certified load rating. It was an old logging chain from the days of river drives, each link forged by hand, the metal thick as a man's wrist. Wyatt dragged one end to the stone, wrapping it carefully, using the natural contours of the granite to get the most secure purchase. The other end was not attached directly to the tractor. Hollis was smarter than that. He drove the case forward until it was standing on the driest, most stable patch of pavement he could find. Then, he and Wyatt drove a massive steel stake into the ground behind the tractor, anchoring a pulley block to it. The great chain ran from the boulder, through the pulley, and then forward to the tractor's drawbar. Grant watched this, his engineering mind clicking. The old man was doubling his pulling force. It was clever, but it still wouldn't be enough. His calculations were clear. When everything was ready, Hollis climbed back into the operator's seat. Wyatt took his position, standing a safe distance away, his job to watch the chain, the anchor, and the stone. Hollis looked over the scene. He checked his steam pressure. He checked his water level. He looked at the faces in the crowd, at his son Dale's worried expression, at Grant's skeptical posture. Then he looked at Wyatt, and they exchanged a brief, steady nod. Hollis did not yank the throttle. He eased the Johnson bar forward, just a fraction of an inch. The engine took the slack out of the chain with a loud clang. Then the strain began. The engine's chuffing deepened. It went from a relaxed chuff, chuff, chuff to a deep, labored chuff, chuff, chuff. The rhythm slowed as the pistons pushed against the immense, unyielding pressure. The whole machine trembled with effort. The big steel wheels did not spin. The cleats beat into the asphalt, holding their ground. The chain grew taut, vibrating with a low hum. Small flakes of rust fell from its links. The pulley block creaked in its shackle. The ground itself seemed to groan. But the glacier stone did not move. Grant crossed his arms, a flicker of vindication in his eyes. He knew it. The physics were immutable. But Hollis was not finished. He was just listening. He was feeling the resistance through the frame of the engine. He knew he was at the edge of the machine's power, but he also knew that its power was constant. It would not fade. He gave it a little more steam. The chuffing grew even slower, each beat of the pistons a monumental event. Choof. A pause that seemed to last an eternity. Choof. The safety valve on top of the boiler began to hiss, releasing a feather of excess steam, the engine working at its absolute prescribed limit. And then, a new sound. A low, grinding noise came from the stone. A crack appeared in the mud seal around its base. It had shifted. Perhaps only a fraction of an inch, but it had moved. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Hollis kept the pressure on. He didn't try to go faster. He let the engine do its slow work. The boulder shuddered again. Then, with a great tearing screech of rock on pavement, it began to slide. It moved at the speed of a dying snail, inch by agonizing inch. The case engine pulled, its stack blasting smoke and steam into the sky, its great wheels turning with a slowness that was hypnotic. It was not a battle of force against mass. It was a negotiation. The engine was applying a relentless, undeniable argument, and the stone, after 60 years of silent repose, was finally being persuaded to listen. Foot by foot, the great stone was dragged across the road. It left a deep scar in the asphalt, a testament to its weight. Hollis never varied the pressure. He just sat at the controls, one hand on the throttle, a part of the machine, guiding its strength. Finally, with a last shuddering groan, the glacier stone cleared the pavement. It came to rest in the soft mud of the ditch, its bulk no longer an obstruction, but merely a large, impressive rock at the side of the road. Hollis throttled down. The chuffing eased, and the only sound was the gentle hiss of the idling engine and the drip of water from the trees. The silence from the crowd was absolute. It was not the silence of confusion, but of reverence. They had just witnessed something impossible. Grant stood frozen, his clipboard hanging uselessly at his side. His data was correct, but his conclusion had been utterly wrong. His world of numbers had failed to account for a different kind of power, a different kind of knowledge. He looked from the massive displaced stone to the old, panting steam engine, and then to the quiet old man at its controls. He felt the foundations of his professional certainty crack. The aftermath was quiet and swift. There was no celebration, no triumphant gloating. Hollis simply backed his engine up, and Wyatt began methodically coiling the great chain. The townspeople began to drift away, speaking in low, respectful tones, as if leaving a church. Grant walked over to Hollis, who was now on the ground, checking his machine. The engineer took off his hard hat. I don't understand, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The tractive effort required was beyond the theoretical limit of those wheels on this surface. Hollis wiped a greasy hand on a rag. It's not about the limit, he said. It's about how you approach it. Your machines, they try to break the limit all at once. They hit it and they fail. This one, it just leans on it. It leans and it waits. Eventually, something has to give. He patted the warm steel of the boiler. It's a patient machine. The next day, a formal and very unusual work order was processed by the Green Mountain County Engineering Department. It was an invoice from Hollis for a single day's work, which he had been persuaded to submit by the town selectmen. Grant approved it without question. Under Description of Services Rendered, Hollis had simply written, "Moving one stone." The event changed things. It changed the way the town saw the old man and his noisy, smoky contraption. It was no longer a folly, it was a legend. But more importantly, it changed Wyatt. The last vestiges of his youthful embarrassment were scoured away, replaced by a deep, abiding pride. He no longer saw a pile of antique iron, he saw a legacy. He began spending all his free time with Hollis, filling notebooks not just with mechanical details, but with his grandfather's stories and philosophies. The knowledge was passing from one generation to the next. Dale, too, was changed. The next Sunday, he didn't go to his pristine auto shop. He went to his father's barn, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He sat with Hollis beside the silent engine, and for the first time, he asked not why his father had saved it, but how. The story of Hollis and the Glacier Stone became a quiet parable in that corner of Vermont. A story told to illustrate a truth the modern world is quick to forget. The conflict was never truly between a man and a rock. It was a conflict between 2 philosophies. One philosophy, that of the engineer Grant and his excavators, is the philosophy of the spreadsheet. It is a world of quantifiable metrics, horsepower, revolutions per minute, cycle times, and cost-benefit analyses. It is a philosophy that values speed and efficiency above all else. It builds machines that are powerful and impressive, but their power is brittle. They are designed for a world of predictable problems, and when they encounter something truly stubborn, something that falls outside their operating parameters, they break. Their strength is their greatest weakness. The other philosophy, that of Hollis and his steam engine, is the philosophy of the land itself. It is a world of unquantifiable qualities, patience, persistence, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the material. It values not speed, but relentless, steady effort. It builds machines that are slow, inefficient, and difficult to master, but their power is resilient. They are designed for a world of unpredictable and stubborn realities. When they meet an obstacle, they do not try to shatter it with a single violent blow. They lean into it with the weight of time and constancy. They understand that the most powerful force in the universe is not a sudden explosion, but a slow, inexorable pressure that never ever gives up. The engineer had horsepower, which is the measure of how fast you can do work. But the old farmer had torque, which is the measure of the work you can actually do. The modern world is obsessed with the former and has almost entirely forgotten the latter. It has built a civilization that is fast, complex, and astonishingly powerful, but it is also fragile. It has forgotten the simple, stubborn wisdom of the old machines and the old man who knew how to listen to them. It has forgotten that sometimes the only way to move a mountain is one patient inch at a time.